Good evening, friends. Reading passages from the Peticha and the Chokhmat Kabbalah. Teachings of Rav Ashlag. We're in chapter 1, section 7. It's a small section. In the spiritual world of Bria, the second aspect is dominant, and the vessel desires to give. When the soul develops and arrives at the world of Bria and attains that vessel, the soul is then called Neshama. The soul becomes separated from God's essence and ascends to a name of her own, Neshama. This vessel, however, is very refined because it is aligned with the Creator and is therefore considered completely spiritual. Okay. Commentary. The spiritual world of Bria, the second aspect, is dominant, and the vessel desires to give. When the soul develops, and arrives at the world of Bria and attains that vessel, the soul is called Neshama. When the soul wants to be similar to the light of Chokhmah that is shining in her, meaning she wants to be a giver rather than a receiver, the soul has arrived at the world of Bria. Right? So the soul in Chokhmah, in the first level, the first world, was completely filled with the light of Chokhmah. And the vessel was nullified to the light. In Bria, the next world, the soul recognizes the light and that the light comes from a giver, and the soul wants to be like a giver, wants to be like God. And at that point, it is separated from the divine and it ascends to a new name, Neshama, the soul. The soul becomes separated from God's essence and ascends to a name of her own, Neshama. Question. We have learned that the desire to give attaches the created being to the Creator. Here it says that the desire to give separates the created being from the Creator. How do we understand this, right? Because we've said that the desire to give is a similarity of form to the Creator and thus creates a connection, and it's the desire to receive that creates a separation. But here it's the desire to give that creates a separation. So how can then we understand this? Answer. In Chokhmah there is no awareness of receiving. In contrast, Bina is fully aware of her receiving. This awareness is the separation. The reason Bina chooses to give is because she feels the weight of her receiving. Interesting. So this is answer 1. In Chokhmah, in the first level, in the first world, there was no awareness of receiving. But in Bina, she is fully aware of her receiving. And it's this awareness that she is receiving. She realizes, I'm a vessel and I'm receiving. It's this awareness that creates the separation. The reason Bina chooses to give is because she feels the weight of her receiving. She realizes she's a vessel in receiving and feels the weight of that receiving and wants to be like God and be a giver. Bina, answer 2, Bina deflecting the light is the first action made by the creation, and the action separates creation from creator. Okay, so this is another way to understand it. Bina deflecting the light, saying, no, I don't want to receive the light, I want to be a giver, is the first action made by creation. The first action made by creation. And that action itself is what separates creation from creator. In Chokhmah, this is not the case. Because the creation has no self-awareness and makes no independent movement. For these two reasons, the soul emerges from the essence of God. The soul attains her name, Neshama, because the vessel has attained a state of independence. The vessel, however, is very refined because it is aligned with the Creator and is therefore considered completely spiritual. Commentary. Since the vessel is only concerned with giving, it is aligned with the Creator, right? And considered thus very completely spiritual because it's aligned with the Creator and is only concerned with giving. There are two aspects to what is happening here. One, the soul becomes a spiritual entity separate from the Creator, meaning the vessel is no longer nullified by the light as it was in Chokhmah, and now recognizes that it's a vessel. The soul's independent existence is born. 2. When the soul is born, it only wants to give. This connects the soul to God. A baby in its mother's womb is part of the mother, not yet considered an independent being. This is like the sphere of Chokhmah, in which the vessel is nullified by the light. When a baby is born, it becomes an independent being, but is still connected to the mother and receives all its nourishment from her. This is like the sphere of Bina. On the one hand, the vessel is no longer nullified by the light and has become an entity of its own. On the other hand, the vessel is connected to the Creator because it desires to give. Afterwards, in the Sfirot of Zer Anpin and Malchut, the solidification of the desire to receive causes the vessel to become progressively disconnected from the Creator. This process is similar to a child growing up and becoming independent, considered completely spiritual. The difference between spirituality and materiality will be discussed in section 11. Okay, that was section 7. And we'll go on to 8 because that was a short one. In the spiritual world of Yetzirah, the third aspect is dominant. This aspect contains a small amount of the desire to receive. Therefore, when the soul develops and arrives at the world of Yetzirah and attains that vessel, it is no longer the spiritual aspect of Neshama and is now called by the name Ruach. Okay, so this is another level of soul called Ruach, which is connected with the world of Yetzirah. Now, a small measure of coarseness is mixed into the vessel, meaning the vessel has some desire to receive. This aspect is still considered spiritual, however, because the measure of coarseness is not enough for the soul to be entirely distinct from God's essence, to be called a body, and be considered independent. Right? So it still has the desire to give, which in this third level, the desire to give is still much larger than the desire to receive, but it still has a small amount of the desire to receive, and that mixture of coarseness makes it into a different aspect. The aspect is still considered spiritual because that measure of coarseness is not enough for the soul to be entirely distinct from God's essence. In the spiritual world of Yetzirah, the third aspect is dominant. This aspect contains a small amount of desire to receive. Commentary. This third aspect, called Zer Anpin, which is another name for Yetzirah, and another name for Tiferet, begins to desire the light of Chokhmah. The desire is for only a small amount of light. Therefore, when the soul develops and arrives at the world of Yetzirah and attains that vessel, the vessel of Yetzirah is the vessel of Zer Anpin, is the vessel of Tiferet. It is no longer the spiritual aspect of Neshama and is called by the name Ruach. Since the soul now has some coarseness, meaning some desire to receive, it descends from the Neshama's purity, meaning it descends from the Neshama's attribute of pure giving. The soul is now called Ruach, an aspect lower than Neshama. Now a small measure of coarseness is mixed into the vessel, meaning the vessel has some desire to receive. This aspect is still considered spiritual, however, because the measure of coarseness is not enough for the soul to be entirely distinct from God's essence to be called a body and be considered independent. Even though there begins to be some desire to receive, the principal characteristic in Zer Anpin is the desire to give. Zer Anpin's attribute of giving attaches it to the Creator. That was section 8. We will do one more tonight. We'll do the fourth world. Number 9, section 9. In the spiritual world of Asiya, the fourth aspect is dominant. The vessel is now the full measure of desire to receive and is complete. The vessel attains an aspect of being a body that stands on its own, completely separate from God's essence. The light in the vessel is called nefesh, alluding to light without movement. Know that every tiny detail of reality is comprised of all four aspects of Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. Every tiny detail of reality is comprised of all four aspects of Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. So this fourth world, this fourth aspect is called nefesh, the level of soul. So we went neshama, ruach, now nefesh. In the spiritual world of Asiyah, the fourth aspect is dominant. The vessel is now in the full measure of desire to receive, and it is complete. In the fourth aspect, malchut, the desire to receive attains its maximum measure. There is no longer a desire to give. The vessel attains an aspect of being a body that stands on its own, completely separate from God's essence. The soul being separate from God's essence means that the soul doesn't feel the existence of God. The soul being separate from God's essence means that the soul does not feel the essence of God, the existence of God. The soul does not feel the existence of God. As long as the soul has an aspect of giving, it is connected to the Creator. In this fourth stage, Asiyah, Malchut, the soul no longer desires to give and only desires to receive. This separates the soul completely from God, or this separates the soul from God. The light in the vessel is called nefesh, alluding to light without movement. Question: we experience God's light differently depending on our vessel, but the light itself never changes or moves. So what does it mean that nefesh in particular alludes to light without movement? Answer: one meaning of the word nefesh is quote-unquote without movement. In spiritual terms, movement means trying to develop spiritually by giving. In spiritual terms, movement means trying to develop spiritually by giving. Since the vessel of Asiyah desires to receive and has no desire to give, the vessel makes no movement in the spiritual terms. The light that shines in Asiya is considered a light without movement, because light shines according to the vessel. Know that every tiny detail of reality is comprised of all four aspects of Atzilut, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. Every detail of reality is rooted in the four aspects and comes into being through this progression. Every detail of reality is rooted in the four aspects and comes into being through this progression, through this involution process. Summary of the last four sections. The Peticha is describing the soul's descent through the spiritual worlds and describes the characteristics of the worlds. The soul develops through the worlds of Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. When the soul arrives at the world of Asiya, the aspect of Malchut, the desire to receive, is manifest in its full measure, and there is no desire to give. Okay, friends, that we just cleared 3 sections, and we will continue, God willing, with section 10 tomorrow night. Have a good night.